This video is sponsored by Squarespace. It's that time of the year again. We did this in 2020, we did it in 2021, it's 2022, and today I'm going to be reacting to your most controversial Formula One opinions. I asked you on Twitter, I've asked you on YouTube community, I also asked some of you in real life at the Canadian Grand Prix a couple of days before I got married. I chatted to a bunch of you, it was great, asked your opinions, but I didn't plug my mics in correctly, so the audio is...
Oh, everyone's getting in, don't worry, everyone's getting in.
Look, I'll make the best of it. This video should be a fun one. It's a long one as well, so sit tight, get your popcorn, get ready to hear what I think of some of your most fraudulent takes.
Hi, my name is Kel Kruger and I come from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Daniel Ricciardo is not washed.
Kel was the first guy I chatted to in Montreal, so he's got to start the video. Daniel Ricciardo's not washed. Now, obviously, this is just after the Canadian Grand Prix, which wasn't a great Grand Prix for McLaren in the end. I've said this a million times before, Daniel Ricciardo's clearly not a driver who can jump into anything and drive it quick. It needs to fit his style. His first year at Renault didn't really suit him. Second year, great. The Red Bull, fantastic, worked a treat for him. But this McLaren, it's never seemingly quite clicked. Look, he said it himself, if you give him a car that can win races, he will win races. And to be fair, he has won a race in that McLaren. Problem is it hasn't worked enough for him enough of the time. Sure, there's responsibility on McLaren for that, but also it is a reasonable downgrade on Daniel's legacy, I'm afraid. Wash to me means just stealing a living, and he's certainly not doing that. The expectations that Daniel Ricciardo has set in our minds makes this current tenure at McLaren look a lot worse than if he was just a mediocre driver beforehand. You know what I mean? First Twitter question from Jason Hassett. Christian Horner and Toto Wolff are actually best friends, but have taken shares in DTS. Now, no question, I think their relationship is a lot better than it's portrayed typically. I think for a lot of sports people and people who operate in these spaces, you have to be able to differentiate personal relationships from professional ones. And they're both team principals. They do have quite a bit in common. Maybe they don't conduct themselves in exactly the same way, but I reckon they have more in common than they don't. So you know what, Jason, I wouldn't say they're besties, but I reckon they're closer than most of us think they are. And then first YouTube community question, Tommo better than every other F1 YouTuber. Chase, why is this controversial? Surely this is the most undisputed statement in this video, hence why it has 0 likes.
I'm AMARA.
I'm Cole and we're from Toronto. Lando's going to win the World Drivers' Championship in the next 3 years.
Lando will win a World Drivers' Championship within 3 years. Do I think he's got the minerals if he's given the car to win a championship? I do. This question all comes down to whether you believe McLaren can give him or Daniel the package. Thing is, I think they're too much on the back foot now. These regulations aren't changing massively in the next 3 years. They'd not only have to catch up with Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, but they'd have to overlap them to an extent that Daniel's clear talent can eclipse the likes of Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, who I can't sit right now and consider better than any of those three. So thank you, AMARA and Cole, but unfortunately I can't see that happening. So before my YouTube stuff all kind of kicked off, my work was very much graphic design, photography, a little bit of animation, and my website, tommokluski.co.uk, is it's like a little time capsule into that window of my life. Here's some cool animation I made, look at that, oh, and it splits and then it comes back together. Really happy with how this logo came out actually. Obviously my trainer stuff, no brainer, I do miss doing these. And some pictures of yogurt that I took. Look at this, mate, this is decent. I'm sorry, it just is. Well, with today's video sponsor Squarespace, you can also have your very own website, be that a portfolio like mine, or a blog, or an e-commerce website if you want to sell stuff. I've been using them for years, way before they started sponsoring the channel, so you know full well that this is a genuine endorsement, alright? And the best thing is you can try it, play around, free of charge. It's only when you want to put the website you've built and created live to the rest of the world that you have to pay anything. And when that time comes, head to squarespace.com/TommoF1 to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. At Netherland5, there is an actual agenda against Seb in F1. I think it's clear that the FIA straight up hates him. I've seen nothing but retirement rumours around him in the last 3-4 years, so I think it's safe F1 media doesn't like him either. Now, I don't think the FIA hates Seb. I don't think that's true at all. Do I think British F1 media used to have a problem with Seb? I do actually. I think the consistent winning put a bit of a bitter taste in a lot of mouths. I do think the retirement rumours since he joined Aston Martin were a bit unfair, for sure. I think they've been way blown out of proportion. But I also think that retirement rumours in 2020, when he was having a shocker at Ferrari, fair enough. When a driver of his experience is having such a bad time, retirement rumours are going to come up. So I think there is some truth to this, but I don't think there's an agenda. Paul Dudnoth says, I can't stand the V10 nostalgia brigade. Look, we all love the sound of V10s, no question, but you can't just sit in the past. The sport won't exist, it won't survive, it has to evolve, it has to move forward. And unless there's a commercially viable way to create a truly sustainable biofuel that V10 engines could potentially run on, which maybe could be a thing if there's the desire to put the R&D to make it happen, then perhaps they could return. But I don't think that's what most of the V10 nostalgia brigade that Paul's talking about want. They just want old, dirty V10 engines, which it's not going to happen. So I kind of see where Paul's coming from here.
Miles from Chicago. George Russell will never win a World Drivers' Championship.
Russell will never win a World Drivers' Championship. Miles was pretty critical of Russell actually here, which, you know what, look, Russell did blow a few opportunities at Williams, but I think so far this season he's been mustard. I think he's been quality, and the performances he was able to show in that Williams were top tier on many an occasion. Do I trust Mercedes will be able to give him a package to fight for a World Drivers' Championship? I mean, look, they did it, 8 constructors in a row, so I don't see why not. I think he's got the potential ability to fight up there with Leclerc, with Hamilton, with Verstappen. So Miles, mate, I'm disagreeing with you there, buddy. Andros says, people love saying that today's drivers couldn't do it in the 50s, 80s, when in reality drivers from the 50s were too fat to fit in today's cars. So I get Andros' point here. This is kind of like in the football debate, right? Where we say, oh, who's better, like Messi or Maradona? Well, obviously, players didn't take care of themselves in any way. They didn't have the fitness back then that they do nowadays. And I think you can say the same about F1 drivers, right? If Lewis Hamilton existed in F1 in the 60s, he wouldn't be the same Lewis Hamilton he is now. He wouldn't have had the access to testing that he's got now, and he wouldn't be anywhere near as fit as he is now. And that's true for any driver when you're comparing eras and generations. So I don't think anyone's seriously saying that Fangio in his 50s could jump in an F1 car and be quick. But if Fangio had grown up in this era and was in his 20s now, would he be in F1 if the opportunity presented itself? Thought25 says Mick Schumacher is likely to end up like Bruno Senna or Nelson Piquet Jr. Be good but never as good as the legacy of his surname. And that's the thing, right? You're a surname merchant. Okay, so obviously to live up to his dad's standards is always going to be a nigh on impossible standard to hold Mick to. Can he be a very good and capable F1 driver? Sure. I think he's got more potential than Bruno or Nelson Piquet Jr. for me. I think we're starting to see Mick come out of his shell now. Yeah, he'll never be as good as the legacy of his dad.
I'm William and I come from Montreal. I heard Gasly will race for Mercedes in 2024.
So William says Gasly will drive for Mercedes in 2024. Now look, this is one that I would have been more on board with before this season started. Gasly has had a difficult time this year. He's struggled to adapt to this new car. And that is a problem because, these cars, this philosophy of F1 car is the current and the future of the sport for the foreseeable, right? Being quick in the old generation of cars is now irrelevant if you're looking for an F1 driver. What's important is that they can drive this type of car quickly. Do I think his stock is as high as it was at the end of 2021? No. Mercedes are going to be open to options. I'm sure Lewis won't leave them in the lurch like Nico did when he was just bye. I'm sure he'll give Mercedes time to find a suitable replacement before he eventually hangs his gloves up. Do I think that'll be Pierre Gasly? I'm not so certain now, I'll be honest. The Staynax says the Jeddah Corniche circuit is one of the best circuits in the calendar in terms of racing, driver endurability and landscape, but because it's in Saudi Arabia, it gets hated on. Okay, I don't agree on the landscape. I get it's on the beach, but I don't think it looks anything special from the broadcast cameras that we see anyway. It does offer a real driver challenge for sure when someone hooks it up. The way Max was hooking up that lap before he binned it was mad impressive, how close you get into the walls. Those fine margins do make it more exciting. There is potentially a bit of a, danger argument to this track. We have seen some pretty nasty shunts. You have to accept a degree of danger at any track we go to. Silverstone isn't seen as a dangerous track, yet Joe had his huge accident. So do I think there's more that the Jeddah circuit can do to mitigate those dangers? Yes, I do. And look, do I agree with the sport racing in Saudi Arabia? No, I don't think there's any justification beyond the money. That's a legitimate concern, but also I do think you can analyse the track and the politics of the venue separately.
I'm Dante and I'm from Chicago. Championships do not equal a great driver.
So the point Dante's making here is just because you've won loads of championships doesn't mean you're a better driver than someone who's won less, which I think is a fair point because there's so much context that goes into winning a championship. Again, when we're talking about the greatest drivers of all time, we're trying to talk about a sport that's a team sport in an individualistic way. A driver can never show their potential if they don't have a good car. As human beings, it's in our nature to look for the easy fixes, the easy responses. Oh, this driver won the most championships, so they must be the best. And sure, most of the time, the best drivers will command the best cars because they put themselves out there and showcase, I'm the best, you need to hire me. And I think this links on to at DJ Lowell's point, which is Fernando Alonso is the most talented F1 driver of all time. If he was in a better car like a Red Bull or Ferrari, he would be at the top of the standings by a country mile. Now, again, Fernando's only got 2 world championships, but he is typically considered, and I agree, that he's typically considered higher than those 2 world championships let on. I think Fernando's consistency, his talent throughout his career really puts him at the sharp end of, for me, the GOAT debate. Not to mention he was 1 point off in 2007 and a Vitaly Petrov off in 2012. So, it's funny how things could be so different if slight things changed. But you know what? That's life. Arjun Singh says, it's fine Spa's not being renewed. Not a great race since 10 and 2008, both due to weather conditions. Otherwise, the race has been dull, filled with DRS passes and rare cool moves through Eau Rouge. I mean, look, obviously you're talking about Albon passing Perez on the grass clearly there. Look, I do understand the fundamental point that, has Spa delivered the best racing in F1 over recent years? I think that's a fair argument to say no. Certainly not been the worst, but I don't think it's been the best. However, and I've talked about this when I talk about Monaco, right? I think you've got a calendar of 20 plus tracks, right? I think all the tracks should offer something different, unique and special, right? Maybe Spa isn't the best for overtaking and battling, but you know what? It's Spa. It's an incredible challenge for the drivers. It's got so much character and personality. With 20 plus tracks on the calendar, there is more than enough room for Spa. It might not deliver in every single aspect, but that's okay. I'd rather have 22 tracks that, have strengths in some areas and weaknesses in others than have 22 tracks that are all just kind of middle of the road at everything. Logan says, F1 becoming more environmentally aware is a good thing. Again, this shouldn't be controversial. It's all well and good sitting there moaning about, F1's getting so woke, try to be environmentally friendly. Fine, go off. The sport will die and your mindset will be responsible for that. It has to change, whether you like it or not. All we can do is try and make sure that what that change is a good change that preserves good racing, preserves the spirit and the character of the sport. There's no point moaning and complaining. It's a waste of time. The sport is changing. You have to keep up. Otherwise, it's going to die. And you know what? If you don't want to carry on following F1 and you don't like the direction it's going into, that's also fine. You don't have to. There's plenty of other motorsports.
I'm Charlie, I'm from Toronto. Mick is not and will never be worthy of an F1 seat, and Lance Stroll is obviously better than him.
Charlie's saying Mick doesn't deserve an F1 seat. So, look, again, I think it hasn't been a great year for Mick overall so far this year. Yeah, it's certainly been better. This last 4 races seemingly turned things around. Even like last weekend, I think, yes, he did extend in qualifying, which was an L, but I think the pace is there now with Mick. And I definitely think he's shown that he's at the level to hang. What this does make me think, though, to deliver the level of pace that Mick Schumacher is right now, which is a good level of pace, I honestly think that there's a lot more drivers out there who could do that. I think if you stuck a, Pato O'Ward or Alex Palou or a Kamui Kobayashi or a Will Power or a Scott McLaughlin, if you gave them time, they would at least be at that level. I think there's a good motorsport level, a lot more drivers than we think maybe could get to if given the opportunity. The thing that should make F1 the echelon, though, is that you've got these drivers like your Max Verstappens, your Lewis Hamiltons, your Charles Leclercs, who can deliver that extra bit of pace, right? And we've not seen that from Mick. So to say he doesn't deserve to be in F1, I mean, again, Prime attacks in his junior career. I know Charlie talked here about his F2 career wasn't the most impressive, let's be honest. He didn't win very many races at all, but he was consistent. Was he anything special though? Not really. Did his name buy him opportunity? Of course it did. So I do get where Charlie's coming from, but I think now Mick's here, and I've said this about Lance Stroll as well. Now Lance is in the sport, I think he's learned and he's got to a level where I think he does kind of merit his place. Lizard says Jamie Chadwick could blitz most of the current F3 field. There was a few about Jamie Chadwick actually, so I thought I'd stick this in. Now obviously maybe I'm a bit biased because, you know, can't say I know Jamie, but I did a video with Jamie where we ate hot wings.
Like, you actually looks like you played the ghost.
So I've got a lot of time for Jamie. She's clearly a cut above the W Series field. I would love to see her in Formula 3. I think it was budget stuff that didn't allow that. Now, what is exciting, because it seems that Caitlyn Jenner has really taken... It is Caitlyn, isn't it? I really don't follow these people. But she's really taken Jamie under her wing and will hopefully be able to give her opportunities beyond this season in W Series to potentially race in F3 and show what she's really about against the broader talent pool that is the rest of Formula 3, Formula 2 maybe, who knows.
My name is Alex and I'm from Ottawa. Refueling shouldn't have left the sport.
The idea of bringing back refueling is very interesting. In fact, Alex was saying it should never left in the first place. Now, of course, there were safety concerns at the time. There were a few high-profile incidents. I think refueling adds more strategy than it takes away for sure. Obviously, you don't have to rush so much with the tyres in a pit stop if you're refueling. And I do really like that sense of anxiety you get around pit stops. I think that is a good thing, and I think it adds a real team element to it with the pit crew, right? But obviously if you add fuel, then that changes, you know, do you start light and put less stress on the tyres and then put more in later, blah blah blah. I'll be honest, I don't really have a strong opinion to bring it back, but I do think it would be fascinating to see, maybe in some kind of one-off capacity. I would just love to see how that would work in real life and kind of test it before potentially rolling it out. Mauro, Michael Schumacher is overrated. If it wasn't for external factors, wouldn't even considered top 10, 5 of all time. Look, you look at that test in the Jordan 191, jumped straight into that car, had barely any running, not even a test, it was qualifying, wasn't it? And put it, like P7, delivered bits in the Benetton, and then the way he was able to take that Ferrari from a team that hadn't won a title in, 21 years, and turn it into and help turn it, and take a big role in turning that team around, not just behind the wheel, but behind the scenes as well. Sure, it was a perfect storm, but he played a huge part in that. I can't get on board with this one, Mauro. I do think he indulged in the dark arts on a few too many occasions. I'll agree with that. That definitely does affect my perception of Michael. And the way his career ended at Mercedes when, you know, Fernando Alonso's shown you can have longevity way into your 40s, right? So I think they're fair points against Michael. But for sure in his prime years, like, no question, Michael is right up there.
I'm Katie. I'm Tommy.
We're from Vermont in the United States. Alex Albon back to Red Bull Racing.
Albon's return to Red Bull. Look, I would I like to see this happen? Not really. There's a lot of memories in my chest that 2020 was difficult, and look, do I think he was thrown in at the deep end? He was driving a Red Bull in his rookie season, remember? And the reason he got the seat in 2020 was because he had done a much better job than Pierre Gasly had done. And Red Bull clearly saw more potential in giving him the seat than Daniel Kvyat as well for 2020. So he was almost a victim of his own 2019 success, Rookie of the Year, remember? I think Red Bull would be silly to completely close that door and completely write him off, but I also think that Tsunoda's going to get to that level, and I think Tsunoda's going to be the one to take on that crown. Newbie says, worst thing to happen in decades is Netflix Drive to Survive because it's a massive influx of people who are toxic, very emotional. Unfortunately, right, when you cast the net out and when anything grows, you're going to get more toxic people, right? Look, I could say the same, right, about this when I started this channel, right, and but up to 20k subscribers, I've replied to every single comment I'd ever received. I really felt I could engage with everyone, and there were, you know, a couple toxic comments, but not many. But obviously now the channel's, you know, grown to 10 times that. The percentage portion of toxic people is probably the same, but because the bigger numbers bigger, then that little number's also bigger. I think the only way F1 was going to grow more than what it already had done up till 2017 was to appeal to a more broad fan base. a more casual fan base. Unfortunately, that does come with negative, toxic people, but I think the positives of securing the sport's future and for, introducing more people to F1 and turning more of those casual fans into hardcore, really invested fans, I think that massively outweighs the negatives. It's easy to go on Twitter and see the toxicity and get caught up in it, but I think broadly speaking, DTS has been great for the sport. I'm sure plenty of you watching have come through DTS, so it's not been all bad, right?
My name's Chris from CCF1 channel. It's the best track on the calendar.
Oh, Chris, of course you're on the Canadian Grand Prix prop. Link above to CCF1, by the way, check them out. Cassidy and Chris do a phenomenal job with their channel. And you know I love the Canadian Grand Prix, right? And having been there and experienced the circuit in person, I would recommend, if you're someone who's never been to a Grand Prix, honestly, I'd recommend Canada over Silverstone. It's more compact, it's easier to get to, it's beautiful because it's in this lovely park with all these nice little lakes dotted about. You can feel the passion of the Silverstone fan base when you're there, no question. But Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, on and off track, for me, as a total experience, I'd recommend it above anywhere else. Fat Joey says Ocon is actually a better driver than Gasly, just people like Gasly more because he's more likeable on social media. Ocon doesn't have, if you look at all of the drivers, I feel like Esteban's got one of the lowest social media followings. No question, a driver's popularity, whether or not they've delivered on track or not. You got to remember, Ocon's had some tough teammates. In his F1 career, he's had Sergio Perez, who is obviously considerably more experienced than him at the time. Daniel Ricciardo, who'd just come off a fantastic stint at Red Bull. And now Fernando Alonso. Like, Esteban has not had it easy. And yes, he's never beaten a teammate. But come on now. Sergio Perez, Daniel Ricciardo, Fernando Alonso. Those are three incredibly experienced, talented, well kind of ingrained into the sport drivers. Gasly, on the other hand, obviously, yes, he got bodied by Verstappen at Red Bull, was teammate to Kvyat, and is now teammate to Tsunoda and Brendan Hartley as well. So the calibre of teammates that Pierre's driven against have been nowhere near, again, apart from Verstappen where he got wiped the floor with, nowhere near the calibre of Ocon's teammates. So actually I think that's more why Gasly carries a bit more weight than Ocon, because I think he's done a better job against his teammates. But again, people forget how good Ocon's teammates have been. Also, Pierre does love to post a thirst trap on Instagram, doesn't he? So I'm sure that helps. Adam Lambert says, Sargent over Piastri. Led him in F3 until his car did a Ferrari. Broadly speaking, and I think Sargent's proven this in his rookie season, that he is very, very, and he was very close to Piastri's levels in F3. There was really nothing between them. And he's delivering in his rookie season. Mainly around him are drivers with a lot more experience in those F2 cars, and he's looking very much at home. I don't think there's enough to say Sargent's better than Piastri, but I also think, and again, Williams need to prioritise giving him a seat, because, you do wonder, like, if Piastri ends up racing for Williams in 2023, but is still an Alpine driver, and if Logan wins F2 this year, which obviously he took a big hit with his technical DNF this weekend, if Sargent won F2 but then they couldn't give him a seat because Piastri's taking it up, that would be pretty egg on face from Williams.
I'm Ridwan, I'm from Bangladesh, but I live just 20 minutes from Japan. Red Bull did Albon of 30, stick around Williams for a bit, and then we'll have a Georgian Russell.
Albon Russell at Mercedes. Look, I don't think Albon is as good as Russell. I've said that before and I'll say it again. I don't think there's a huge amount in it. I think Alex Albon's a fantastic driver. I rate him on that level with, Ocon, Gasly, kind of below where I rate George and Lando. But who knows, Ridwan? Times change, and maybe. He's doing a very good job at Williams at the minute. Mercedes power, I don't see it happening. In a big way because, Alex is still actually part of the Red Bull family in a kind of weird, obscure, unknown of the details way. But hey, if he keeps driving well, then he's only going to continue to make his stock bigger and help recover that 2020 pummeling that it took. So Adrian says Jarno Otmar should be in Formula 1. He is better than Latifi, Mazepin, Stroll or Joe, and F1 Esports give him a lot of accuracy and capacity to not make mistakes and experience in Formula Renault. Jarno, is this your burner account, mate? I know you're a huge fan, Jarno, but what is this? No, honestly, right? I was literally thinking, the reason I picked this one out, I was thinking it was like a couple of weeks ago, I was watching the F2 and I was just like, I would love to see, and we've seen Chembol at Bassi, you know, F1 esports racer, like jumping into a real car and, you know, doing an okay job. Is he right at the sharp end? No. But I would love to see, with Jarno's experience and knowing what Jarno has done and what achieved, same with James Baldwin as well. We've seen what he's done in the McLaren in British GT. I would love to see Jarno do like a test day in a Formula 2 car and see how close he can get to the top guys. I would be super intrigued to see how quick he would be relative. Absolutely. But do I think you should be an F1 Jarno? Maybe if you get enough Twitch primes, you can buy your way in. Mr. Dr. Professor, Rubens Barrichello is the best F1 driver to never win a championship. Mika Salo is the best to never win a race. Ooh, best F1 driver to never win a championship. I have to kind of talk about my era kind of growing up, don't I? And now, obviously. You know, drivers I think, actually. So I think Juan Pablo Montoya comes to mind for me. I don't think Rubens, to be honest. I just don't see it. He did get pretty bodied by Jenson Button in that brawn when he did have his opportunity. Yeah, I would say Juan Pablo Montoya. I really think Robert Kubica, if he hadn't have had that accident, I think Robert Kubica would be a multiple-time world champion if he was given the right car. JPM and Bobby K for me. What about you? Let me know below.
I'm Elizabeth and I'm from the US. Hunter at Secure 2020 was faked by...
I wasn't going to put this in because I thought this was ridiculous, right? Russell was betrayed by Mercedes at Sakir. It wasn't all above board, right? Mercedes were playing games to make sure Lewis doesn't look bad, right? I thought, you know, Elizabeth's kind of maybe a bit too much sun during the day, all right? It's okay. We've all come out with weird things. But then I found on Twitter, KAZ1F1, controversial, George was sabotaged in Sakir 2020 to prove that it isn't easy to win in a Mercedes car with 20 likes. So clearly Elizabeth's not alone in this thought. Look, like obviously that's not true. The fact that Jules didn't win doesn't change the fact that he was clearly the quickest driver that day and would have won if it wasn't for these technical gremlins. Not giving him the win doesn't change that fundamentally. Sure, if you're just going to look at the results and be like, oh, he only finished 9th or wherever he finished in the end, he's obviously not that good. Yeah, but that's just stupid. Obviously you're not actually trying to look and analyse what happened in an objective, logical manner. Sabotaging George doesn't change the fact that he was the quickest car that day and should have won that race, and that's clear for everyone to see. Matthew Ocado says, guys like Vettel, Alonso, and in a few years Hamilton taking spots away from talented young drivers. This whole taking spots away from young drivers thing, I don't really understand it. I don't think young drivers are entitled to opportunities in the sport. I think it's good that F1 are giving FP1 runouts and enforcing that. Teams are trying to get drivers in younger and younger, but I do think talent should come above everything else. Look, obviously when a driver gets to their 40s, it would be silly for them to not consider the future. It's the same in any other sport. If you've got a centre back who's 39, then you're probably going to want to think about replacing them and lining up the future fairly soon. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's nothing that makes a 22-year-old entitled to a position that a 39-year-old has. And that's true in football, and I think that's true in F1. Lance Stroll is incredibly underrated, mostly thanks to Daddy's cash. Just look at his form in the first half of 2020 when he was P4 best of the rest in the World Driver Championship, and he was starting to look that real solid driver until that puncture in Mugello derailed his confidence. Blah, blah, blah. There were lots of pro Lance Stroll comments, actually, throughout. So I picked this one out from RM99, but there were plenty more. And I do kind of, broadly speaking, agree. I think Lance gets, because he hasn't got the biggest fan base, he's not the most popular driver by any stretch of the imagination. And I do think he wasn't at the level when he first came into the sport. He was clearly there based off of his money. He got a lot of leg ups in his junior career. You know, Lance hasn't had to work for it as much as a lot of other drivers have had to. No question. But I do think now he is able to outperform Seb on occasional weekends, which is huge. I think Seb's performing at a really good level. I think Lance is more often than not behind him, but not by like a ridiculously stupid amount. Like if Seb was doing to Lance what, you know, Mick was doing to Nikita last year, fair enough. But it's just not been that way. And I think Lance, you know, he's got himself to a stage where he's a perfectly good F1 driver. And again, he's still only 23, so he's got plenty of time. Not obviously just because of his age, but also because of who his dad is, to improve and grow and enforce his position in the sport. Thank you all for submitting your questions. Thank you to everyone at the Canadian Grand Prix who was there and responded as well. I appreciate you all. I'm sorry for everyone who didn't make it into the video. I caught up my bad. Like and subscribe. Big up Squarespace for sponsoring this video once again. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.